5 minutes to save a stranger or save my future. That's the knife edge I stood on outside a glass testing center, my nursing exam doors blinking a cold countdown, while a black Mercedes sat crumpled around a fire hydrant, and a pregnant woman bled into her designer silk, whispering, "Help my baby." If it were you, what would you have done? My name is Kesha Williams, and on that morning, everything I had worked for hung by a thread. 4 years of study overnight shifts the promise that a license could carry me and my family out of the projects. 50 yards in front of me, that future gleamed through clean glass. 10 feet to my right, a mother fought to breathe. I looked at the admission ticket sweating in my palm, then at the woman whose hands trembled around a 7-month belly, and the choice made itself. I ran. The hood hissed. The airbag sagged like a punctured lung, and steam curled into a sky too bright for the kind of pain happening in that car. "Stay with me," I said, keeping my voice steady even though my heart was slamming. "What's your name?" Her eyes were glassy lips, pale. "Eleanor," she whispered, then flinched as a contraction tightened like a vice. "Is my baby?" "Heartbeats strong," I said. Already moving jacket pressed to the bleeding head wound. Chin tilted for airway, left lateral position, to keep the vena cava open to the baby legs, elevated just enough, counting her breaths, and my seconds, because both mattered. Phones were out everywhere. A crowd recording, watching, waiting for a show, instead of a miracle. You know what I mean. We've trained ourselves to film saving instead of doing it. Sirens finally sliced the noise, and when the EMTs yanked open the doors, Eleanor grabbed my wrist with surprising strength. "Don't leave me." "I'm right here," I told her, and climbed into the ambulance like I belonged there. Maybe I didn't yet on paper. But that day paper didn't matter. The ride blurred into numbers and gut instincts. Blood pressure, a rocket headache, like a bell-ringing trouble protein in urine back at the crash, preeclampsia all over her face. I rattled off vitals and positioning to the paramedics, their eyebrows lifting the way professionals do when they recognize competence that isn't supposed to be in the room. At Metro General, the doors flew open, a team swarmed the gurney, and just before they pushed her past the line where families stop, she pressed something into my palm, a card thick enough to feel like a promise. "I won't forget," she whispered. "I promise." Then the doors swallowed her, and the city swallowed me. My exam window closed with a mechanical click. No late entry, no do-over. On the bus back to our building, the world didn't pause for my good deed, it just rolled on. People arguing about nothing, a baby crying the same graffiti, the same busted elevator, with the same sign out of order. Home was 3 flights of cracked stairs, the smell of cheap bleach, and last night's dinner, and my mom at the table in her hospital scrubs, eyes rimmed with a fatigue that never really sleeps. My little brother Marcus sat on the couch, pretending to read a textbook, while actually tracking my face like a storm chaser. "How'd it go?" he asked, and I didn't have to answer. "Tell me you didn't throw away 4 years for some stranger." "She was 7 months pregnant," I said soft, because the shame crept in right behind the pride. "She would have died. Her baby, too." He snapped his book shut. "People die here every day. Not if I can help it," I said, and maybe I sounded braver than I felt. That night, sirens sang like they always do. Grandma Rose's oxygen concentrator hummed its tired lullaby from the back bedroom, and I lay on the pull-out couch, scrolling my cracked phone. I typed the name on the card, Eleanor Ashworth. And there she was, in 100 polished images, ribbon cuttings, and charity galas, smiling beside a silver-haired man the captions called William Ashworth, Tech Billionaire Philanthropist. I laughed, but it was pure bitterness. I missed my one shot to save a woman who could buy the whole block and level it before lunch. Do you think that's fair? The next morning, I mopped floors in the hospital, where I'd helped save her life walking past crisp scrubs and clipped voices that wore the future I'd lost. The supervisor didn't look up when he handed me a mop for Trauma Bay 3. Blood on the tiles tells the truth even when people don't. After my shift, I walked 12 blocks to a diner that served honest coffee and edible everything else tied on an apron, and smiled like my feet didn't hurt. At closing, I counted tips in quarters and singles, $63 for 12 hours of work, then climbed those same 3 flights with a bag of groceries that had more hope than nutrition. On the table, an envelope with the Nursing Academy's seal waited like a verdict. Missed exam equals automatic dismissal, reapply in 18 months, full tuition required. $28,000, 18 months of waiting, 3 months before we get evicted if nothing changes. Math can be cruel. Marcus read over my shoulder, jaw set like concrete. So that's it. We're just done Grandma's meds, Mom's back our rent, all for a stranger. You sabotaged yourself, Keisha. My mom gave him a look that could hush a room. She did the right thing. Then she squeezed my hand under the table, and I felt both love and worry in that grip. I pulled the card out of my pocket and turned it over and over. I didn't call. Not because I didn't want to, because pride is expensive and I couldn't afford to look like a beggar. Yeah, I know how that sounds. 3 weeks crawled by, each one heavy. Then came Thursday, 4:15 a.m., lacing my shoes for another double shift when Marcus yelled from the kitchen, "Kesha, you better see this." I peered out our foggy window, and there it was. A white Rolls-Royce Phantom parked in front of our building, like a spaceship confused about its landing pad. Kids pressed faces to glass. Mrs. Rodriguez filmed from her balcony. Even the corner boys paused mid-transaction. A chauffeur stepped out in a black suit that probably had a name carrying an envelope sealed with gold wax and an avalanche of white roses. "Miss Keisha Williams?" he asked in a British accent that sounded like money and private schools. Yeah, that happened. Inside the envelope on heavy paper that made my fingers feel clumsy, the handwriting was simple and clean. "Dearest Keisha, 3 weeks ago you saved my life and my son's life. I promised I wouldn't forget. Please join me for lunch today at 2 p.m. There's something I'd like to discuss. With deepest gratitude, Eleanor. P.S. Henry is healthy and beautiful." I looked at my mom. She looked at me. "Go," she said. "See what Grace looks like up close." The drive to their neighborhood felt like time-lapse. Chipped brick giving way to neat porches giving way to manicured lawns until we passed iron gates manned by men with earpieces, and the house rose up like somebody dreamed it, and then paid to make it real. White stone tall columns, windows sparkling back the afternoon sun. Inside the floors were marble that made me walk softer walls lined with art I'd only seen in textbooks, and the air smelled like lemon and old wood, like history that never had to apologize. The maid led me through to the garden, roses in military rows, a fountain singing to itself. And under a white pavilion sat Eleanor, hair pulled back, eyes calmer, a bassinet beside her, where a tiny chest rose and fell like a promise. "You came," she said, standing carefully. "I wasn't sure you would." "He's beautiful," I whispered, looking at Henry. "He's here because of you," she said, and tears brightened the edges of her voice in a way you can't fake, not even with money. William joined us. Tall suit that probably had its own publicist. But he shook my hand with a grip that said we were equals for at least this one moment. "We saw security footage from the street," he said. 17 people walked by. Only you stopped." That number sat heavy. 17. I didn't say what I was thinking. Where were they, and why does fear make statues out of people? They laid it out carefully, not as charity but as a partnership. A full scholarship to finish my degree room and board books and supplies, plus a paid role with their medical foundation, serving the communities I understood, because I belonged to them, and a guaranteed job after graduation. My pride flared on instinct. I can't take a handout. William didn't flinch. Then don't. Take a job. We need someone who knows the difference between outreach and posing for photos. And then came the twist that changed everything I thought I knew about that crash. The part of the story money can't cushion. I was in your neighborhood because of my daughter, Eleanor said, voice thinning around a wound that wasn't old enough to scar. Her name was Sarah. She struggled with addiction, and she died that morning. I was driving back from identifying her body when I crashed. I didn't want to be saved. She looked at Henry, then at me. You saved me anyway. Grief speaks one language, rich or poor. I felt something inside me soften and harden at the same time. Yes, I whispered, and everything turned. 2 months later, I woke up in a small apartment near campus, where the windows actually opened, where the fridge hummed and held more than leftovers, where the light felt like it belonged to me. The foundation paid Grandma Rose's medical debt. All those collectors stopped calling like someone had cut the right wire. Marcus put on a school uniform he pretended to hate and secret loved. At the foundation clinic, I worked under Dr. Brooks and learned the education you don't get from books. How to translate fear into trust. How to tell a mom the truth in a way that didn't break her. How to be from the block and also be the person the block listened to. Every week I ate dinner in the Ashworth's breakfast nook. Henry grabbing my necklace with sticky fingers, Eleanor laughing at nothing, the way mothers do when their house finally feels safe. William started leaving his phone face down. That's how I knew he liked having me there. Stick around because what happened next will blow your mind. It didn't come from the streets. It came from a podium. One Wednesday, my phone lit up like a 5-alarm fire. Nursing student under investigation for fraud. A man in a perfect suit named Marcus Reed stood in front of microphones and said I had exaggerated my role in a medical emergency to secure luxury benefits from the Ashworths, a scholarship housing a job, that I'd practiced medicine without a license, endangered a mother and her baby, and then cashed in. My clinic badge got suspended by lunchtime. Procedure Dr. Brooks said, eyes saying everything else. At home, my mom tried to talk me into moving back in where people knew me, and Marcus whispered the kind of anger older than both of us. Told you the rich don't love us. Reed wasn't random. He was strategic. Weeks earlier, he had bought a controlling stake in the city's largest private ambulance company. If he could stain the Ashworth Foundation, city contracts would roll to him and our free programs would choke. He had motive money and a practiced smile. William's mouth turned to granite. He's been circling us for years, he said. Eleanor's hands shook when she set down her tea. He asked me to marry him a long time ago, she said quietly. I didn't. We got busy. William hired an investigator who found what you only find if you're willing to turn over rocks with names underneath. Quiet lunches with city officials paid in cash donations that looked suspicious, traffic camera footage from the crash, day gone like it never existed. The paramedics who'd praised the pre-hospital care transferred to different stations, as if by coincidence. But we also found 2 things Reed couldn't bury: hospital records and the 911 audio archive. Dr. Maria Martinez had Eleanor's intake notes, blood pressure numbers that would scare any OB, protein and urine signs of placental trouble, and documentation of proper pre-hospital positioning. And the 911 call, they keep those for 7 years. Had my voice laying out symptoms, left lateral positioning, airway BP calm, when I had every reason to fall apart. The hearing room felt too small for the number of cameras crammed into the back, too bright for how dark the accusations felt. Reed went first, slinging words like violations, timing, influence, profit. He flipped through my scholarship like it was a receipt, as held up my apartment keys like stolen property. He made compassion sound like a con. "Do you think that's fair?" When they asked me to respond, I said the only sentence that survived the panic. "I saved a woman and her baby." Reed smiled thin. "Without proper certification." I swallowed hard enough to hurt. That's when the doors opened. William walked in like a man who still believed in rules. Eleanor followed with Henry asleep against her shoulder. Dr. Martinez came with a folder thick enough to change minds, and a woman I didn't recognize carried a tablet like a sword. Truth had arrived with witnesses. Eleanor spoke as a victim, not a donor. I was dying. Keisha saved me. Dr. Martinez followed with facts no press conference can bleach. Severe preeclampsia, life-threatening vitals, correct pre-hospital positioning, likely preserved placental flow and maternal airway. The woman with the tablet, Jennifer Walsh, forensic accountant, pulled the sheet off Reed's motive, walking the board through his ownership in the ambulance company and payments to officials that looked like the kind of gratitude nobody declares on their taxes. William set the trap. "You filed your complaint the day after the incident, Mr. Reed, but media didn't report the crash for a week." "How did you know the details?" Reed blinked, and for the first time his smile cracked. Then Dr. Martinez pressed play. My 911 call filled the room with a voice I almost didn't recognize, calm, clinical human. "Pregnant female, approximately 28 weeks, severe preeclampsia indicators, left lateral position maintained." The sound of my own breath steadied me. When the board chair spoke again, her tone had changed. "Ms. Williams, we owe you an apology." They dismissed the complaint, recommended accelerated certification with commendation for performance under pressure, and referred Reed for investigation. Reporters shouted questions, cameras flashed, and in the middle of all that noise, Eleanor reached for my hand and whispered, "Amali protects family." I believed her. Graduation came like sunlight. You can finally stand in. I wore the white cap straight, the honor cord gold against my shoulders. Grandma Rose wheeled into the front row, smiling, like the fight was worth it, my mom crying, my brother pretending not to. After the ceremony, we stood again in the Ashworth Garden. Same pavilion, same fountain, different air. William raised a glass. "To our newest director of emergency medical services," he said, and I looked behind me to see who he meant. "You've been leading for months," he told me, rattling off patient satisfaction rates and a 40% drop in maternal mortality in the neighborhoods we serve. Numbers matter, but what stuck with me was Henry reaching his hands out, chanting, "KK," like he'd named me. Years later, I stood outside that same testing center, watching students hustle in with that same white-knuckle clutch on their tickets, and saw a young woman freeze at the crosswalk when an elderly man tripped and groceries spilled into the street. People filmed. No one moved. I stepped beside her, touched her elbow, and said, "I stood here once. I chose the stranger. The exam can wait. That man can't." She tore her ticket and ran to help. I texted Eleanor, found our next scholarship, and smiled at how some choices echo. Now here's where I'm supposed to say it, all wrapped up with a bow. Girl from the projects makes the right call. Rich family rewards her villain, exposed future secured. But that's not the truth I carry. The truth is that 17 people walked by. The truth is that if I had failed, some of those same folks praising me would be asking for charges. The truth is that systems sometimes punish the very courage they claim to teach, and sometimes the only reason I made it through is because a billionaire's last name sat next to mine at a table with microphones. Do you think that's fair, or just how the game is played? I don't have perfect answers. I have a clinic van that shows up where buses don't, nurses who speak the language of the block, promotoras who knock on doors with blood pressure cuffs and calm voices, and a sign on our wall that reads, "True wealth is measured by the lives you lift." I have gratitude heavy as gold and anger hot as a stove that will never entirely cool. I have a memory of a ticket slipping from my fingers and a city that didn't stop for it, and I have a baby's laugh in a house that once felt too big for me. That's my truth. So let me ask you straight up. If it were you at that crosswalk, would you have turned toward the car or the exam door? When the law says step back, but your gut says step in, which one do you obey, and who are you? If you choose wrong, should we change the rules so helping doesn't risk your career, or would that open a door to chaos? Do you think I got lucky, or do you think luck favors people who move? I want to hear you, because the next Maria standing at that curb might check our comments for courage. If this hit you anywhere tender, stick around, because this channel doesn't do fairy tales. We do human stories that bruise, heal, and sometimes change what's possible. Drop a comment and tell me where you stand. Should I have waited for professionals, or did I owe that mother my best, even without a license? Share a time you stepped in when it cost you, or a time you didn't, and still think about it. Like, share, and subscribe if you believe true wealth isn't parked in a driveway, it's written in the lives we lift. Family protects family, and whether you were born into it or chose it, you're part of mine now.